Hey, what's up guys? Joker here, and I hope you're all doing well. Today, as promised, we are going to be taking a look at the performance in Batman Arkham Knight when it pertains to Denuvo DRM. As I discussed in yesterday's video, we've got a unique scenario right now where the Epic Store version of this game has actually had Denuvo DRM removed from it, while the Steam version, which I had already owned, does still have Denuvo DRM. And also right now for this week only, as of when it's going up, you can actually get all of the Arkham games as well as 3 Lego Batman games for free over on the Epic Game Store, so that's definitely something worth considering if you haven't played any of the titles yet. They are absolutely fantastic games. But in this video we're going to be looking at average frame rates, 1% lows, 0.1% lows, and also load times, as that's something that could be affected as well by Denuvo DRM. But first, today's video is brought to you by LevelKey.com, where you can save money on games for all of your favorite platforms, as well as software like Windows 10 Pro for under $16, Microsoft Office 2016 for $33, and Microsoft Office 2019 Professional Plus for under $70. And if you use my code PDS22 at checkout, you could save yourself 22% off of your Windows 10 Pro key, or you can get 3% off of the entire website with the code PDS3, or 16% off with PDS16 for any software over there. So be sure to check out the links down in the description below. Now, I want to say that for most people, this is probably going to be a fairly uninteresting video, but for those of you out there that are into this sort of granular testing, and especially the controversy that, Denuvo DRM has found itself under over the years, this, as I said, this is a fairly unique opportunity where we can actually test with and without Denuvo DRM at the same time on what is otherwise the same exact version of the game with all the latest updates, same drivers, and all of that stuff. So first up, I do want to talk about load times, because that's one of the areas where I thought maybe we would see an actual difference in how long it takes the games to load. For those uninformed, Denuvo DRM versions of games will typically have significantly larger executable files. For instance, the most recently released Borderlands 3, their executable comes in at a whopping 600 megabytes, which is insane for an executable file to launch a game. A standard non-Denuvo game will probably be around 50 megabytes, so we're talking more than 10 times larger of an executable file. And with something like that, with Borderlands 3, we might actually see longer load times. Although, I'll get it out right now that with Batman Arkham Knight, I did not see that being the case, even though the executable files are both pretty different. If you come over here into my games folder, right now I'll show you, this is the Epic version as it's installed straight to games. It's not in the Steam library. So if we go in there, go to binaries, Win64, we can see the Batman Arkham Knight executable comes in at 53,811 kilobytes. If we go back again to the same games folder, this was all running off of the same SSD, so nothing different there at all. And we come to Steam, Common, and locate Batman Arkham Knight again, binaries, Win64. We can see that this executable comes in at 102,369. So that's the Steam version, which has Denuvo DRM. So you can see that this is double the size of the executable on the Epic Store version. And again, that is solely because of the fact that it is still using Denuvo on the Steam version of the game. But what does this actually equate to when it comes to load times? I went ahead and launched it from the desktop on both versions of the store, and just basically put a time code to this, and just kind of checked out the data. And as soon as it got into the black screen right before the actual artwork of the game and stuff like that, that it was loading in, that's where I chose to stop it, as that is basically when the game loads up exactly. And at the end of this, and also there's a splash screen that comes up, the Arkham Knight splash screen. Both of those came up at the same time at around 17 seconds. And then at the end of everything, the Epic Store version did launch slightly faster, but we're talking within a second here, at 24 seconds and 16 frames, while the Steam version was 25.19 seconds. So, yeah, that's basically identical. And also the Steam version had a very brief, maybe like half a second white screen before the black screen came on. So that's also something worth considering there, is if that white screen is where we chose to measure the Steam version, where it's actually no longer in the desktop, we would very likely be looking at identical numbers here, if not within maybe just a couple of frames of each other. So with load times out of the way, we would now want to move into game performance. I tested this all on the same system. I didn't go through any different hardware or anything like that. I was just testing on my main gaming rig, which is using an RTX 2080 Ti Founders Edition along with a Intel i9 9900K. I was at a loss for what's in my system again? Intel i9 9900K at 4.8 gigahertz. So that was the system that I used for my testing. I did test at 1080p and 4K. I initially just wasn't going to test at 4K, but that was putting us in a situation where I was basically GPU bound because I was running the game at the highest available in-game settings, except for using some of the NVIDIA technology. I didn't have any of that stuff enabled, but just the base options I had completely enabled and VSync set to off. So those are the options that I was using for testing. And as I said, I tested at 4K, but I also tested at 1080p because I wanted to put ourselves in a situation where we were no longer GPU bound, and that was definitely the case, as the GPU is regularly around like 60 to 70% utilization at 1080p with VSync off, probably running into a limitation there somewhere with, you know, CPU speeds and stuff like that, just not able to push out any more frames, you know, possibly from the game engine. So we were definitely finding ourselves no longer GPU bound when testing at 1080p. So let's go ahead and take a look at those numbers first. Yeah, just like with the load times, this is going to be mostly uninteresting, as I was actually shocked that there was absolutely zero, and I mean zero, variance whatsoever between the Epic and Steam version of the game. There's usually a little bit of variance between runs even on the same version of a game, but this was absolutely identical, getting an average of 199 frames per second. The 1% lows were 125, and then the 0.1% lows, which I included to get just a little bit more granular, was 114 frames per second. So absolutely a deadlock tie at 1080p, where we were not GPU bound with those benchmark runs. And then moving up to 4K, we did see a slight variation there, but it actually favored the Steam version, which is using Denuvo DRM. But as I said, you know, from run to run, you can definitely see a variance of anywhere from like 1 to 5 frames per second in any particular benchmark. So yeah, you know, kind of take that for what it is even though the Steam version has slightly higher numbers here, it's really within variation, and this could have easily gone the other way on a different benchmark run. So yeah, the Epic version got an average of 121 FPS, while Steam was 123. The 1% lows were basically a deadlock with a 1 frame difference, and the 0.1% low on the Steam version was a fair bit higher at 76 versus 71, but again, that could have been anything. There could have been a hiccup in the benchmark or something like that at the initial load in on the Epic version for whatever reason that maybe wouldn't be there in a future run. So again, this is really, even though there's a little tiny variation, this is pretty much a tie at 4K as well, where we are finding ourselves GPU bound. So that's really all I've got for you guys on the Denuvo DRM testing. Unfortunately, we didn't really get to see the big variation maybe we wanted to see. I don't know if you wanted to see it or not, but you know, everyone always complains about Denuvo DRM, so it would have been nice to at least have that validated and see some sort of performance difference, whether it was in frame rates or load times or whatever. So I guess this is actually good news that it was not causing a performance difference, at least in this particular title. There are several different versions of Denuvo DRM that we've seen over the years, and as the years have gone on and crackers have started to be able to crack these games and they've been pirated, even though Denuvo initially was very hard to crack, it's now become easier for them, although the latest version, like we've seen in Borderlands 3, which constantly needs to phone home to do checks and balances and things like that, and can be actually hardware bound on a system-to-system basis for the way that it checks to make sure it's a legitimate copy. You know, with different versions, we could see a difference in performance, but all we could say right now is for at least Arkham Knight and the version of Denuvo DRM that it was using, which is a fairly older version of Denuvo at this point in time, there is roughly no performance difference whatsoever. And of course, in the future, if we see any other games like this where it's possible to test, you know, with and without Denuvo DRM, then I would definitely jump at the opportunity to do it, because I would be curious to see if there is any difference in the newer versions, which can be a little bit more intrusive. Those larger file sizes, I think for sure could affect load times, also depending on, you know, your hardware, and, you know, if you're using a mechanical hard drive, you know, loading a 600 megabyte executable versus a 50 megabyte executable could definitely take a little bit longer. It's probably not going to, you know, be anything insane, but it could be maybe a few seconds faster for one version versus the other. So that's something we'll just have to look at in the future, you know, if it becomes a possibility to be able to do that. But let me know your thoughts down in the comments below on the Arkham Knight Denuvo DRM testing. Were you surprised with the results? Were you, is this exactly what you expected to see? Leave your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below, as I do look forward to reading through those. I'm going to get out of here now, though, and enjoy the rest of my weekend, and I hope you guys all do the same. I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Ta-ra.